should have emailed you, warned you that was coming. We did not.
No, I love it. So much more exciting this way.
Hello and welcome to SnarkSquad Pod, the media podcast with a sense of self-preservation. I am Nicole Sweeney.
My name is Marines.
And joining us again this week is Sam, or the Democracy Diva.
Hey guys, this is Sam. You can find me at democracydiva.com or on Twitter at democracydiva.
So Sam is joining us again for something that I feel like we call you in to just talk about the things that we know that we can count on you to be a diehard fangirl for. That's going to be your chief role as our guest here.
It's great. I have to do very little prep work.
So this week we are talking about George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones, the first book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. And yeah, so Sam also helps recap the show for the site for SnarkSquad.com, but also is the sort of show recapping team's resident book fan. So I guess to start, Sam, what happens in this story? I mean, I don't know how you even begin to give a brief plot synopsis.
Oh boy.
Of this book.
All right, I'm gonna give this a shot. When we get 20 minutes in and I'm still on the first chapter, just stop me.
If the summary just cuts off abruptly,
right?
Editing.
You'll know why.
Post-production. Yeah.
So this story tracks, almost identically with the first season of the TV show Game of Thrones. And it is kind of what you think your standard medieval fantasy-esque story would be, with warring factions and families in conflict and powerful lords doing powerful lord things. But it's set against sort of the backdrop or the bookends of a magical fantasy series. And so you're dropped right into kind of the magical existential crisis aspects of the story, and then you go and dive into the politics of the lands that you're in and get to know these people and forget completely about the overarching conflict of we're all going to die because there's ice zombies.
Yep.
That's how I would begin to set up how you dive into a story like this one. And so it sets you in the perspective, it starts you in the perspective of the Starks, who are one of the noble families in this country called Westeros. And it takes you chapter by chapter into different perspectives of them, of families that they're in conflict with, and of just a variety of different people who all have links to the same world.
You did a very good job of keeping that concise.
Thanks. It was really hard.
So one place to begin this conversation, I think that to the degree that this story has a through line, it's Ned's story.
Yeah.
That everybody else is table setting for things to come. Everybody else's sort of plot lines, the degree to which we are not following Ned is the degree to which we are setting the table for future books. And Ned is probably the closest to here is a story, with a beginning, a middle, and end, and tragic end is the story of Ned Stark. So I bring this up as my sort of first thing, because our beginning for all of these conversations is just kind of the basic, did you like this? And for me, I mostly enjoyed it. I would say I come down more on the side of enjoying it than not enjoying it. It did, much to my surprise, give me better feelings about the show, which is sacrilege, I know. I kind of came away, and we'll see how I feel about how I feel about this going forward, because as Sam pointed out, this book and the first season track pretty closely. There's not a ton of deviations there in the adaptation. And so maybe as we get into material where the book did things that the show wildly deviated from, I might have different feelings. But mostly the things that I disliked about this were tied to that sense of how much of what was happening was set up, and feeling oh yeah, the show took this story and just streamlined it. The places where it didn't sit well with me were places where I felt it didn't serve enough immediate purpose for me. Like, I wanted things to have more of a consistent point at like the whole time, in a way that a lot of this didn't. But that being said, even that stuff that I struggled with a little bit, I still ultimately enjoyed. I come down, again, more on the side of enjoying it than not enjoying it, because of all of the ways that the stuff that like it didn't have a point in necessarily in the sense of this book, this single contained entity, but knowing what I know from the show, it's a lot of like, oh, I know why this is here. I know why we're doing this. We're not going to get any payoff for this in the next 600 pages that I'm going to read.
Right.
But I know that one day there is payoff for that moment. So,
yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that's just kind of an interesting way of framing this book, in terms of like, you have Ned's story, which is a complete story. And I would argue Danny's arc is also kind of a complete standalone story. And everybody else certainly goes through changes, but certainly a ton of what we see, probably particularly in Catelyn's chapters and maybe Tyrion's chapters as well, is so much more about what's going to happen in the next book and the books following than it is about what's happening now. And so I don't know that I felt that way the first time I read it. Although for me, the first read of this was like so overwhelming that like I didn't understand anything that was happening. For most of the later books, I didn't know which chapter I was in and whose perspective I was reading. I had no idea what was going on. But I definitely do see, and on this, maybe fifth reread of mine, where like literally all I do is spend every chapter being like, there's foreshadowing, and there's more foreshadowing, and there's even more foreshadowing. And I love all of it and get excited every single time. But that definitely is, reminiscent of that same idea of this is definitely table setting, and like it's all going to matter. And like the minute details of things that will end up mattering will blow your head off in like 80 years, but you have to wait those 80 years to get there.
For me, it's even difficult to say that this is a story that I enjoy, because it is. I'm entertained by the story, and I love a lot of these characters, but it's such a gut punch in so many ways that to even say that, like, to tie the word enjoy to this very, very dark story is difficult. But this is a story we'll say that I enjoy, but this was not a reading experience that I enjoyed. I just did not have fun reading this at all. Like, even the foreshadowy things that they were cool to see, but it wasn't worth the time invested, honestly, because it tracked so closely to season 1 of the show. Like, there wasn't enough there that I felt like I did when I watched all of the Harry Potter movies and then read the books, where it felt like bonus content. Here it didn't feel like bonus content. It was just more words to get to the exact same places. So I don't know. I didn't hate it, obviously. It's a story I enjoy. I just didn't enjoy the reading experience, I guess.
It's also hard because the story, this is sometimes the case too with watching the show, where because so much of what happens is like it's bleak and dark, that there are times where the experience of consuming this story feels almost oppressive. And yeah. I felt that the sort of this question of like, will I say enjoy? I don't know, whatever. All of Ned's chapters were just
awful.
Ew, like that was one of those things where knowing what happens, it's just like I can't. Like it was so just bad. every time I was both. So I was reading. This was like Mari introduced me to the like wild world of reading it on Kindle while Audible is reading to you. I had never considered that as an idea,
it blew
and that's
my
how
mind.
I consumed this story. It was amazing. I highly recommend it. But every time the audiobook guy was like, Ed Odd. I was like, no, not again, no more. So
that's really interesting to me, because I love Ned chapters on reread, and every time he like does something that's like so honorable and like classic Ned Stark, and I'm just like,
it's so stupid.
And you can see it happening around, like it's, but I love how stupid it is. And listen, I mean, yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to talk about this series that I love wholeheartedly in terms of fun or enjoyment, because like, right, it's not that kind of entertainment. Like, it's not a walk in the park. And, you know, if you're not down to read about really horrific shit, then like this one's not going to be for you. And that is totally acceptable. But yeah, it's like torture to see it all happen in slow motion and in painstaking detail, and in even more detail than you get on the show because you're inside his head.
Yeah, hearing him think about his fucking honor.
Yes. Yeah,
right.
And knowing the way that it ends, and not only like knowing the way that it ends, but so a big portion of what Ned is investigating when he goes to King's Landing is who killed the previous Hand of the King, and the clues that he's following are not super, like, they're not super complicated. It's basically that none of Cersei's children were fathered by Robert, but they're fathered by her twin brother Jaime. And like the big clue is that they have blonde hair. So to see this going on and on and on, and he keeps thinking about the gold hair and the seed is strong. I know, they keep repeating this. And it is that like painstaking detail of like, oh, come on already. It's not his kid. So there was a measure of, you know, of some aspect of it being taken away from me because I knew the ending already.
Sure.
Which I'm a huge rereader, so I know you reread for different reasons and you get stuff out of the text. But I think that part of my not liking this reading experience was kind of experiencing those things, because I'm far removed from having seen the first season enough that I didn't think it would be this bad. Like, I only saw the first season one time, and that was years ago now. But as I was reading, it all came rushing back. Like I had watched it yesterday. So.
Yeah, and just all of the foreshadowing that surrounded Ned's eventual beheading. We didn't do our usual spoiler warning, but
if you're not spoiled on that by now, like we don't know what to do with you as a human.
Have you been? I cannot, in much the same way that we were joking about trying to give the plot synopsis for The Force Awakens, like cannot fathom the kind of person that comes to listen to this podcast and like doesn't already know more about Star Wars than us. I also cannot imagine the kind of person that comes to consume this podcast that doesn't already know that Ned Stark gets his head chopped off. Like, I feel like that's like one of those facts, like that's like out, that Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Right.
Ned Stark loses his head.
If we just ruined that for you, like add us at SnarkSquad, please. I want to know who you are.
We want to meet you. We actually want to interview you for the podcast. What
is it that we're doing here that you dig? I'm fascinated.
We also want to know like what bubble you live in, where like, you know, do you know that Trump is president? Can we come live in the bubble? Like what's the situation?
Is it beautiful there? Yeah. Why did I even bring that up? Oh yeah. Okay. Any bit of like the foreshadowing, all of the things, like the setting of the stage towards that particular moment, I think was what was so painful to consume in this slow motion kind of way. In part because going back to kind of having the experience of the show first, I didn't watch the show when it was airing right away, but I got to it early enough that was a surprise to me that I didn't know that was coming. I think I started watching it right before the second or third season started. I forget, something like that. So I watched it, and I remember getting to the final episode, like Ned getting his head chopped off is the end of episode 9, and then like you start episode 10, and I was so convinced that was a dream sequence. Like I was like, sure. I was like, that's not real. You don't do that. I watched so much TV. This isn't a thing. And so it was very, very strange to come to this from like having that been inverted, having that like big twist or whatever be like this known thing, and to see how set up it is. I joked over on the Discord, we've been doing this as kind of like a group read thing, and there's a page where Robert is off hunting the boar. So shortly before Robert dies, Robert's death is imminent. Everything is, if you know what's coming, it's there. That bleak feeling is strong, and Ned sends some men to go deal with Gregor Clegane and his men, who have been like raiding some other lands, but without their banners and stuff. Anyway, Ned sends some knights and stuff to go deal with that, and he doesn't send Ilan Payne, and there is like this entire page that is just like Ilan Payne likes executioning, and you really should have sent Ilan Payne because of how much he loves executioning, and he's gonna feel real slighted for not getting to do the executioning. And like Ilan Payne just really enjoys being part of state-sponsored murder. And how dare you not include him in that? And like that, just like those little moments that I was like, okay, all right, I see what we're doing, and I would like less of it, thank you.
I started watching this, also not live, but the TV show, and I got to, I think it's episode 2 where they kill Lady. Yeah, and that was when I was like, not for me. The show is like are you kidding me? Like
they killed the puppy.
They killed the puppy. Like, fuck this show. I'm not gonna watch it. So I quit. And then it was, I think we started recapping sometime in like season 3 or 4. That Nicole.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, it was right before season 3 started. We started it with 1 and 2, and then like with the intent to catch up.
Yes. With season 3.
With 3.
So Nicole like sent me an email. Somebody suggested we recap it in the comments, and Nicole sent me an email like 1 second later, like Game of Thrones ? And so I was like, okay, like I'll deal with it. I already know that the puppy dies, like I'll be fine. And that season ends with Ned dying. And so I was just like, what did I get myself into? And so all of those feelings of like, man, this is not a show for somebody who gets as heavily emotionally invested, like came back to me. I was reading the book, and like I was doing it again electively. Like I came into this book knowing. Which, I mean, so I should clarify that I didn't enjoy the reading experience for in-story reasons, because it's a gut punch. Like, it's not a happy story, and it really, this is all of the setup and like the beginning heartbreak before you really know that like the Starks come back again. I'm a Stark person. Like, I have a lot invested in the Starks coming out on top. And so there's a portion...
The North remembers.
Yes, the North remembers, absolutely. So there's a portion of the story where you don't see yet that the Starks could come back. Right. And it's all downhill for a while before you know what Sansa becomes and what Arya becomes and what Bran is. So before you know that they have some measure of power, it's all stripping them of that power. And so to be on that end of the storytelling, I'm just like, why am I reading this?
Why am I watching my children suffer?
Yes.
I got into the show, I think, right after season 3 ended. And I don't like totally remember how or why, but I do remember being confused about which one was the Hunger Games and which one was Game of Thrones because everybody was talking about both at the same time and I couldn't keep track of it. So I remember that vividly. And I remember seeing that SnarkSquad was either blogging about it or starting to blog about it. And so I was like, Nate, I turned to my husband, I was like, Nate, would I like this Game of Thrones thing? And he was like, ooh, it's like a lot of murder, but like, go ahead. And so I think the spoiler, I knew something called the Red Wedding happened, but I didn't have any context for what that meant. But I think I had just seen on Twitter, like, the Red Wedding. So I guess I binged like the first 3 seasons in between when season 3 and season 4 aired. And then I watched, like, I was caught up from there. And I read all the books, like, pretty soon thereafter, because I was like, oh, I love all of this and would like more.
More, please. More, please. And then you have since read them, like, 5 more times.
Yes, and, like, the audiobook several times. This is my, like, this is like what I'm always reading instead of reading all the books that I say I'm going to read. I'm just always reading this instead, like in some fashion in like every part of my life.
In the grand scheme of the series, where does A Game of Thrones rank for you? Like, is it one of your favorites or not?
It's so hard for me to separate them, partly because like when all 5 are out and you've read, like, I didn't read one book and then had to wait for more to come out. So for me, the lines between them, and especially because I read on a Kindle, so it's not even physical books, the lines between them are very blurry for me. I guess the first one would not rank that high. I mean, it has obviously iconic and incredible moments, but I can't say any of my like fondest like monologues or stories or perspective chapters really come from this book. And I think that makes sense because like this is when you're getting to know who everyone is, and that's why the later chapters have the meaning that they do, is because they're imbued with all the stuff in this one.
And that's where the payoff comes, is in the later.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's probably towards the bottom of my ranking, and there's still a lot of characters to meet that are awesome that we haven't met yet, but I love it. So. So they're all my children, but I do love them all differently.
Speaking of loving them all differently, and our show experiences, I talked about this quite a bit on the blog, but Emilia Clarke was just like deeply underwhelming, especially in season 1. Like just she has grown with the role quite a bit.
Whatever.
But yeah, I mean, whatever.
This is us paying lip service to being nice about Emilia Clarke.
The first season, it's rough. And so I was surprised by how much I loved Dany. Like that was something that I had forgotten. I was like, oh yeah, like Dany's cool as shit. Yeah. I just sort of forgot because every time Emilia Clarke was on screen, I was like, can you just be better? But I like reading this, and it also kind of going back to everything that we've said about the reading experience. So whereas Ned's chapters were just like viscerally painful, I just like watching him keep making his decisions for honor and hearing him think about honor and whatever was just, and like hearing other people tell him to like do just like a slightly less honorable thing because it would be smart, and him being like, no, but honor was just, that was hard. Meanwhile, like the inverse of that experience was every time we started a Dany chapter, I was so excited. I was like, great, yes, we're leaving Westeros. We're hanging out with the Dothraki, and like Dany's learning, like she, as Sam pointed out, she's the other character that does get more of a full sort of arc in this book. It also happens to be a coming of age story, which, you know, is also always a go-to, and like really getting to experience that, which I think is one of the places where something is a little bit lost by aging everybody up. I think on the whole, I cannot fault the decision to age everybody up. First of all, you cannot.
You literally could not have filmed this. Right.
You can't. With actual children. I am not in any way critiquing the show decision to age everybody up. That was the correct choice. Good job.
Right.
However,
but there are things narratively that you lose in the translation, and I think Daenerys is probably the biggest victim of that.
Yes, the coming of age element to her story, especially the fact that she spends this whole first book, like that having that coming of age story, a little bit is lost watching, what is written as a 14-year-old girl's self-discovery is a little bit different when a 20-something woman is having that same sort of trajectory is a little bit different. And so I think that was something that I kind of hadn't really thought about in a way that I think everybody else, you kind of have these moments of, oh, I know that they're younger in the books and whatever. But Daenerys in particular is somebody who suffers from that in the retelling, and it was really, really cool to get to experience her stuff. Also, it was just not as oppressive and sad. So there was that.
I enjoyed her chapters as well, especially because I am not a fan of Dany. I'm a fan of Dany, like in theory on the show.
Yeah.
But like there's so much like negative credit and like just like built up negative like will with me because of Emilia Clarke. And it's so tough because in a lot of ways that Dany's character is some kind of end game, right? Like they're building her to do something really big and really great, and I just cannot root for her because of a lot of the choices that they've made and the way that they framed her character, but also the actress is really cruddy. So that was one point where I enjoyed being able to enjoy her character a little bit more, and I think that as we continue on through the series, it's going to be good for me to be able to root for her in a way that I haven't been able to in the show.
Yeah, I love hearing that because I'm a big proponent of the idea that, like, Dany's better in the books. Everybody you hate is better in the books. But Dany, I think, it's truer for her than it is anybody else. So I'm happy to have my own opinions that I yell at people validated by you guys.
To that end, we're not there yet. Obviously, nothing in this book has happened. He has not been a point of view character. But one of my anxieties, and Mari has said this as well, in terms of going forward with this, we're going to be doing a book every other month and getting to the book trying to make me like Jamie. So I am not looking forward to it. I just, like, cards on the table right now that I will resist that until the
for as long as possible.
And we absolutely can't get into this now because I could talk about this for 3 hours and he's not even in this book. So we can't do that, but I promise when we get to that episode, we will open with a combo about this.
Perfect. I can't wait.
I will say that part of the heartbreaking stuff about reading about Ned and all of his honorable decisions is that all of these reminders that, he was going to die at the end, and we've experienced so much more story in the TV show and will in the books with all of these other characters that I don't they're great for the story because they're good villains or complicated characters, but the fact that they continue to exist and Ned is dead was insult on top of injury. Yeah. So it's the Cerseys and the Jamies, they're still swaggering, or even Bronn. I'm I kept reading about Bronn and I'm he's still freaking alive. You know how many times he should have died? But nope, he's still kicking and Ned. Yeah. The other side of that though is that as you read about him thinking about honor every day for breakfast or whatever the hell he's doing, is that you just know that he could not have survived this world. Yeah. He was not cut out to live and survive in this world. And you even start to see that with Robb too. He's so like Ned in a lot of ways, in the ways that we see him handling himself. He's another character that was aged up, so it was very impactful to see him young and trying to take hold of Winterfell and do what he thinks is right and do it with
react to that too.
Yes, yeah. So that all has a different layer when he's aged down, but he's another character that you just start seeing his decisions and you're man, the people who are still here playing the game are the ones who have the shades of gray, or I don't know, the backbone to put up with this world, which Ned was never that person.
Yeah, right. Ned was made for Winterfell, and
Ned knew that. Right? Ned, that's why Ned never wanted to leave Winterfell in the beginning of the book. He knew his brother and his dad went south and never came back. And that's something that's interesting to experience on read through, is that scene early in the book where he decides he has to go south, and he has to, Catelyn really convinces him that hey, yeah, he's the king, so if he tells you have to be vice president, then you have to be vice president. No, you don't get to say no, dude. That's not how this works. You know what you have to do. And he did have to do that, but he knew he wasn't going to be good at it. And and honestly, I think he knew it would kill him too.
I mean, the opening scene, the opening scene, it opens with the White Walkers and the deserters, but then you get when they find the direwolves, and it's a dead direwolf with a stag
with
antler.
Right.
Yeah,
that whole chapter, that whole scene with the direwolves. Yeah, so it's the dead wolf with the stag antler, and then they're talking about all the dogs, and all the wolves, and how like they're all gonna die, like they're like without their parent, the dead mother. All the wolves are gonna die, which again also like heavy with the foreshadowing. And Rob was like, "No, Father, we won't let them die." And you're just like, "No, why?" And then when they find Ghost too, who's the last one, I'm like glossing over to get to this foreshadowing point, but the sort of lovely moment where John kind of discounts himself in order to get the wolves brought back, which was beautiful and great. But when they find Ghost, and Theon jokes about how, that one is especially going to be the, sad runt and for sure dead immediately. That whole scene, it gave me a lot of feeling.
Yes.
I will say one thing I love about that scene is that you get, like, because you're in Bran's head, he doesn't understand what the stag horns being in the direwolf's neck means, and actually neither does the reader yet.
Right.
If you're not reading with the show knowledge, and so like looking back, that's like the most obvious symbol in the whole world. But when you're reading it, you don't know. You know that the wolf is for House Stark, but you don't know that the stag is for House Baratheon yet. Nobody's told you that yet. And so the way that is only foreshadowing on your second read and not your first, like that's only symbolic. Like everyone in the world except Bran understands what it means, but we don't, and Bran doesn't. Like it's those details that are the reason I love this story.
Yeah, having Bran tell us that scene, I totally agree, is very smart and effective.
Yeah, and I think there's a billion different examples of the way you find out pieces of the puzzle and never the full picture because you're only in one person's thoughts. And that's like recurring in every chapter, really. But that's probably the thing I love most about this series is what the perspectives, how they're used to show information and how they're used to conceal information. And the gap between what you know, what they know, and what everyone else in their chapter knows just like fascinates me to no end.
Another great example of that was when Arya got lost after chasing cats around King's Landing.
This is probably one of my, if I have a favorite scene in the first book that isn't like dragons being born, it's this one.
Yeah, she like in an effort to get away from Myrcella and Tommen, she like runs away and she ends up in the dungeons of the Red Keep. And while she is hiding down there, she overhears a conversation between two men, and she doesn't know who they are, and she can't follow or understand the information. And I was curious how much of that information I would have been able to follow if I were reading this for the first time without show knowledge. But you just know she's getting all of these important pieces to the puzzle. Like she hears that Dany is pregnant in this conversation, but you don't know that yet. And she tries to communicate all of this to Ned, who's like, there, child, ha ha ha, honor, whatever.
and it's because she only because she doesn't understand well enough to
communicate
it. Yeah, like when she communicates it to Ned, she sort of mangles some of the details too, because she's trying to interpret it herself. And yes, it is also a very effective use of like who has what information when and how that information is used to affect the story.
And that conversation, like, you can forget about for like 4.5 books, and then it becomes like the most important conversation anyone's ever had. And so like, and I know that that's very dumb, but I love it.
There's an element of like all of this, like, there, child, which we see kind of reoccurring throughout the books. And you see it with, Sansa and Arya squabbling and some of what, is going up in Winterfell, and even in Joffrey's being a dick. Like, he's still being like just kind of a young jerk right now. That is so interesting for me to look back on because of how these become the major players in the story. Yeah. And I don't think that's immediately clear, even though we're getting point of view chapters from them. You have that layer of like Ned and Kat and Cersei, and just thinking that maybe these are the major players. So the way that the story brings up this like younger generation and brings it to where we are now, it just was so interesting, especially to see them in the story, but not completely invested in it yet. They're almost on the fringes of the story right now, and we know how much more they'll be invested.
Yeah. going back to what Sam was saying about, the fact that conversation, you can forget about it and then it becomes important 4.5 books later. That is where I come back to on the point of like my meh feelings about it. Like it's hard for me to tell me that I have to commit to, 1,000 pages before something matters.
Yes.
Like that for me that's like a big ask.
It's a huge ask. Yeah.
And I think this is one of those things that is really just like what kind of experience you're interested like in having and like what you're looking for. And I acknowledge that like to me some of my issues with this book and like with my experience of reading this are things that I am reluctant to frame as like, oh, it's bad because of this. It's reasons that it's not for me. And so I think that stuff for me, I struggle with. And going back to, again, why this gave me better feelings about the show is I'm like, yep, I'm into the streamlined version. Like I'm totally here for the, we could chop out 200 pages, condense it, and the thing that matters in 4 books, I can just learn about it in 4 books.
Right.
I don't need to learn about it now.
Right.
Don't care. That's me. And I recognize that that's not everyone. And yeah, that stuff's a little bit of a struggle for me.
That's not me. Like, I love the details and I love the way that this is building slowly. I think the reason why it didn't work for me here always is because I watched it in flip-flopped order. So there's a lot of detail that's meant to give you depth to the world and to the characters, but it's depth that I already have.
Right.
So it's like there's this one example of how they go on for a couple pages about how Ned is such a nice and honorable lord that he invites someone to sit at his table to dine, like one person different every day, at every meal, and they go through a list of whom he might invite. He might invite the kennel master. He might invite Sir Jory. He might invite, and they literally go on for pages about like the people he might invite to his table. And I'm like, I get it. Like, but this is the stuff that it's like building you into who Ned is as a character,
right?
So that when he dies, you feel this pang for this man who had an open seat at his table and la la la. But I already have all of that. So
yeah.
It was really difficult for me to enjoy those portions of it where they, you step out into the market and they tell you everything that they are selling there, but I can close my eyes and see it because I watched it on HBO. Like,
right. I am also down for detail, but the conversation is actually not the best example because that's the kind of thing that I could potentially be more on board for. It is more stuff like what you have just named.
Yeah.
The sort of world building components that that's the stuff that I'm like,
well, yeah, because
less interested in.
You're already in the world, so
yes.
Right.
That just it's when you already know what things look like and sound like and smell like and taste like, which like the show gives you.
Right.
All of that is just okay. This is like literally 300 pages that like I don't totally need to read. So like that is the problem of the show to book thing.
Yeah.
I think that because each successive book is less and less similar to the show, that problem definitely wanes, especially by the time you get to the last couple books where it's just like totally different than what's happening on the show, or like maybe you've gotten like very broad strokes on the show related to that, but like you don't actually know anything about any of these people until you read the books. So that problem I do think gets less and less, but yeah, I think that's definitely a symptom of the book 1 being so close to season 1, that the world building that is like vital to a reader trying to like situate themselves in where they are and like figure out what the difference is between being in King's Landing and being in Winterfell and being in Essos with Dany. Like, if you don't have the show, you need all that world building. Yeah. When you have the show, it's like, okay, let's move on.
So you say that the reader needs it. This for me is like why fantasy is generally not for me. Is because I'm like I don't think I need it. Like, I think there are plot advancing ways that you can show me that like Ned is like this good and honorable man without giving me 3 pages of all of the different individual people who he might have sit next to him at his table. Like, and like that stuff is the stuff, which again, like that's totally like an experience thing. Like I get the sitting in the world thing. I get it. I get why that appeals to people. It
but it's not what you're right. It's not what you're here
I
for.
want a story to move. Like I
Right.
need to feel like we're getting somewhere. I don't want to feel like we're dawdling to look at the scenery.
Another thing that I found like really surprising through my reading, because of our experience with the show, which this is turning into like
It's inevitable.
Yeah. But we've moved so far now into current watching where you set up, it was exactly what Sam was talking about in her description, where you have this kind of medieval-esque story about like politics and the machinations of everybody trying to get on the throne, and the way that swings into a fantasy feel. And I feel like we've full on swung into fantasy with the White Walkers and the others, and the wall coming down and dragons and all of that. So this story starts very heavy in the politics, and they're kept like these little mentions of like the things and the hints. There's one point where Ned says like he would rather face the winter and the north and the others than stay at King's Landing, and I was just like, you sure about that? Like, so that like whole focus and the shift of enemy and the shift of what's important, like that's been my favorite part of watching the show progress, and I love seeing the hints of that here in the first book.
Yes.
This reminds me of a detail that I didn't notice until this reread that I love, and it's toward the end of the book. Bran and Rickon and Maester Luwin and Osha, the wildling woman, aka Professor Tonks, are not Professor, but Nymphadora Tonks. We're about to find out that Ned is dead. Bran and Rickon like basically know but haven't been told, and we're experiencing like that weird situation. And Osha is telling them about like old man stories and the children of the forest, and the others are really real. And she's like starting to get into it of like why she thinks Robb is marching the wrong way, and like, hey, there's this whole world-ending thing going on. And literally she gets interrupted by the news of Ned's death. And specifically, there's a line where they have these dragon glass arrowheads, and they don't know this yet, but dragon glass kills White Walkers. And so Maester Luwin counts them out for Rickon, and he's holding some of them in his hand. And when like the Raven comes in or whatever to like deliver the letter that Ned is dead, he drops them on the floor. Yeah. And this sentence just like screamed at me on this reread. His arrowheads fell from his hand one by one, clattered on the floor. And I'm like, oh my God, like they're literally dropping, they have the weapons to defeat the others, and they're literally dropping them to pay attention to like their own loves and their own losses and their own Game of Thrones.
Right. The issues, Right.
And so when I read that, that's something I would not have gotten in my first 7,000 rereads. But I saw that line and was like, that's the whole thing. Like, that's the whole story in that one sentence.
And it's also just like the way in which they're using who has this information. Like, nobody trusts Osha. Osha is seen as unreliable. And Osha is seen as unreliable in a way that the reader, if you don't have all of the sort of the other knowledge, that you are also given reason to be suspicious of her, it's plausible to you that she is kind of telling stories, and like, I don't know how much of this is true.
Right.
And I think that even without the other knowledge, it leans you to the idea that, she's not completely crazy, like, as Luwin would have us believe, that, she's got a little bit, there's maybe something going on, but you're not necessarily like, oh, sure, yeah, all of this is... You don't necessarily get all the way there with her again, because of the way the story kind of redirects you and pivots you. And yes, all of that is fantastic. And it's also an interesting way too of kind of teasing at the fantasy elements of it too. The fact that, Bran and Rickon knew that this was coming. They knew that Ned had died, but didn't know it yet. And like that kind of stuff. It's like, maybe they just had prophetic dreams because of this, like, the intensity of this episode, but like it's just this one small thing, but that like later is going to become a much bigger thing.
And because like that's the great thing about having the prologue be, where basically all of the magic in the book happens until the very end when Dany has her dragons. So like, even for things that are innocuous, even for things that you're like, oh, well, that's not really magic, that's just a coincidence, like part of you knows like but there is magic in this story, so why can't it be this? And so that informs, everything going forward, even when people you trust, like Maester Luwin or Ned, are like, no, that's not real. Like even though you're inclined to trust them, and maybe on first read you do trust them, part of you is supposed to remember, but I know that there's magic here. I saw it.
Yeah, it teases, but it like teases at those edges in a very effective way. I think that like this, it makes you question it. It's magic is here, but none of these reliable people believe in this magic. So I don't really know what's true yet. And it lets you discover it. I mean, I guess we're only at this the first book. So even in this initial laying of that groundwork, it's doing it in a way that's like letting you kind of work out where that's going, I think.
Yeah. Who were your favorite chapters? Who was your favorite head to be in? I guess we already decided Dany is pretty great and Ned is painful to get through.
Dany is great. Ned is painful, I think, is probably the quick and shorthand answer to that.
And there's not that many perspectives in this chapter, but I'm just interested in what everybody liked or didn't.
So Arya and Sansa are my two. They are the other people that I was most excited to get to their chapters. Sansa, because I have no concept of what it would be like to just like go into this. Like, I love Sansa on the show so much. She's my favorite. Like, whatever. If you've ever talked to me about the show at all, you've heard that I have these feelings that she's the best. And so like I don't know how I would feel about her chapters without all of that. Arya is for sure. That is one that that's definitely inherent to the book, right? That her chapters are so much fun, and it's enjoyable to be in her head. It was also weird, I think, again, being with the show and how far we've gotten with Arya and just the journey that we have watched Arya go on, to go back to seeing her as this much more innocent child she was another one who I don't want to say I was surprised that I like her, but in the same way as Dany. But her side quest has been half the show now. I was ready for that side quest to end way before it did. Yeah. First of all, and it got dark in this way that was kind of shifted my feelings about her. It didn't make me not. I still loved her, but it with some some
reservations.
Some yeah, exactly. And so this was really nice and good to remember, the sweet beginnings of sweet little Arya. She just wanted to play with her sword.
That's right.
I think Arya was up there for me. I struggled with Sansa, but just in the way that I was cringing for her the entire time. And I know how much progress she makes, and of course she's super young here. But even that scene where oh my gosh, it was so bad because Ned had the opportunity. You almost saw him leave King's Landing when he doesn't want to kill Dany because she's a kid and she's having a baby. Right. And so he's he quits basically as Hand of the King, as vice president. And it looks like Robert's going to let him go, and he starts making the arrangements to leave. And it's it makes you feel even more for the fact that he never makes it out. But so in those moments where Sansa's no, I love Joffrey. It's just the internal cringe of oh no, girl. No. Yeah. So those were tough in the same way that Ned's chapters were tough, just because they were, where it's leading, and it's kind of hard to see. But I enjoyed reading Arya, and I enjoyed reading about Tyrion a lot. I just think he's I don't know, his whole quest in this was really interesting to me, and I really did not enjoy reading everything that had to do with Kat. She's another one that makes really stupid choices, and then also her John hate is, you get it, I get it philosophically, but it was very tough to read about.
But it's still so hard to read. Yeah,
so those are hard.
The main reason that was hard for me to read was honestly less for Kat's sake, because I think they did also kind of acknowledge in places that like she even knows that it's fucked up for her to hate this child, you know, but like she feels the way she feels, and like that's some, she's got some internal struggle over that, which I appreciated seeing in that way. To me it was hard to read more for like Ned related reasons, that like I still am like, the fact that he didn't fucking tell her is
I know.
I look at it and I'm like, man, fuck that guy. Is kind of how it makes me feel. Like it makes me have bad feelings towards Ned. So it didn't bother me. The Catelyn chapters didn't upset me to read in that way. It was more like the degree to which they upset me was more like, God damn it. Like there's just like, I mean, I get it. Ned's like honorable forever, but to me that's just added to the long list of like, what the fuck, dude? Like, who are you actually helping with any of this? Like, what good is any of this honor of yours? And like, what is it serving? And like when two people that you love are visibly hurting, like as a result of this oath that you swore to somebody who's been dead for 15 years, is just like, no, I can't. Like, I can't. I find it very difficult to sympathize with that. Like honor, I guess.
Yeah, I think the question of who Ned's honor is good for and when is really complicated and really important to what makes this book in particular strong for me. You know, a lot of people hate Sansa, at least in this book, because she tells Cersei that Ned's planning to leave. And that's what enables really the Lannisters to kill him in the end, because it enables them to capture him. But I'm going to go ahead and blame that on Ned a little bit, because he could have told his 11-year-old daughter, who he promised could marry a prince, he could have told her, no, we're not leaving because I'm mad at you, and we're not leaving because Joffrey's not good enough for you. We're leaving because we're all going to die if we don't.
Right. Right.
And because he didn't think it was important enough, because he never trusted his children enough that they could handle that kind of information, he created a situation in which, of course, an 11-year-old girl who's trying to marry a prince is going to do whatever she can to try and marry the prince, because she doesn't know she's condemning you to death if she does it.
Right.
So maybe if you clue her into that really vital piece of information, like, then Sansa doesn't go to Cersei and be like, hey, what's up? I still want to marry your boy. Don't make my dad take me away. Like,
yeah.
You know, and so I think it's interesting the way Ned's honor manifests itself, and that, you know, we can't stop talking about the honor of a man who has hidden for 15 years his sister's child, who is the true heir to the Iron Throne. Like, the man can tell a lie. He can. It's just when he chooses to that's interesting. And that's something I love in this story. And it's something, you know, this is a conversation Varys and Ned have when Ned's in prison. Varys is like, listen, you're honorable, and I'm sure that's great, like, whoopee for you, but, like, you have kids.
Right.
And you know they have Sansa. So who gives a shit if you're telling the truth or not? Confess, say Joffrey's the king, and save your daughter. And he does. And I think it's really interesting, and again, this is just something I have to point out because I didn't catch it until this read. But right before Ned dies, when he's on the Sept of Baelor, swearing his confession, he specifically mentions, like, I swear it by the High Septon and Baelor the Blessed and the Seven Gods bear witness to my truth. Those aren't the gods Ned believes in.
Yep.
He conveniently left out the gods he actually prays to. And I think that's such a tiny, beautiful detail of Ned being able to justify this lie to himself.
Yeah.
That, like, as long as I don't have to lie to my own gods, I can do this. I just think that's very emblematic of Ned's brand of honor, which, like, we see as this, like, ironclad thing, but it's also, like, way more flexible and complicated, and figuring out why he uses it when he does is like a puzzle here.
Totally.
I think there's an aspect of it too, which I was struck while reading this also between the differences between the lords and, you know, the families that we follow and the sneak peeks that we get of the lower born people. Like we see a lot while they're heading to the Vale. They get attacked a few times by people who are very desperate. And then we see that with Osha and the group of people that she's, you know, traveling with, that they're very poor and very desperate. So I think a portion of Ned's story is also that he's lived in this remote area. He's a lord of Winterfell, and he does not do good. He's used to making a decision, following it through, and not really stopping to consult with people or thinking twice about it. And there's a lot of that we tie in with his honor, but I think he's just like that kind of person where he's like, no, I said this is what we're doing, and that's it. Like that's like his decision making is so hard and fast, and you see that a lot in like the burden that he carries being the Lord of Winterfell, and you know, if you give the sentence, you swing the sword kind of mentality. Like once you make a decision, you follow through, and that's what you do. And unfortunately for him, like I don't know, it just works. It didn't work out that great.
Right.
I actually disagree with that a little bit. I think the end result is true in that Ned ends up making these like rash and poorly thought out decisions, but I don't think that's actually who he is, because I think they work pretty hard to show Ned as someone who like believes in the power of like consulting other people. And like, yes, we hate reading for 5 pages about all those dudes who could have eaten at the table with him, but he's getting their advice on what to do on different things because he knows that they have real expertise. So I think what he loses when he comes to King's Landing is having his own council of people to do that with. I think the problem is not that he doesn't consult other people. I think the problem is that he has no one in King's Landing that he can trust enough to do that with.
Right. And that's text too. Like that's not just like extrapolating. Like that's he mentions repeatedly that he doesn't, you know who he can go to with
and like
something,
he doesn't trust.
He brings it up repeatedly.
Right. He doesn't trust any of the assholes on the council, nor should he, except he trusts Littlefinger, which is dumb.
Even the Littlefinger says, "Do not trust me."
Do not trust me.
Like what more do you need,
I'm
Ned?
trust you.
But you know, like especially once like I don't know, by like halfway through the book when Jory dies, like he doesn't even have somebody from the north who has worked with him before who's like smart enough to talk to him about anything.
Right.
And so who is going to help him make these decisions? You know, the best thing he has is Varys coming to him in a cell with a cup of wine and being like, yo, you got to confess and save your kid. And that actually was good advice. It's just that Joffrey, you know, fucked it all up.
Joffrey's the worst. Yup. It's just that Joffrey's the worst. I think it's really interesting too, the point that you made about the questions of Ned's honor and who it serves and like that being at the center of this story. I agree completely. And I do also want to say that the things that I'm lamenting as being frustrating, they're not, when I say they're frustrating, I think it's in story. This is not me saying, oh, it's a bad book because I'm frustrated. Like I'm supposed to be frustrated. And I know that. And this is also kind of why we struggle with the word enjoy.
Right. It's that same problem.
Yeah, it's that. But I think it is really, really interesting to watch that play out, watch this idea that he has of honor and his sort of code of honor. And there's a whole sort of separate conversation to be had about how to make characters complicated and not like and not excusing evil. But I think and sometimes that is a thing that you know, when you get into like anti-heroes and a lot of stories, that's a thing that I am often not a huge fan of. I think that with Ned's honor, you get that in like a very different sort of way. You have this character that I think that anybody can look at and say like, on the whole, a good dude, but like actually the things that are like central to his goodness are often not actually good. Like they often produce results that are bad and like that could have been avoided by not adhering so strictly to this particular idea of what constitutes goodness. And I don't know, it's a way of asking those questions about goodness that I find like really interesting, because it's not like it's asking those questions without also asking us to believe that somebody who is shitty is like great, which is like a separate kind of issue that I have often in stories that I enjoyed how that was handled here.
Hearing you talk about goodness and like having a character that people can look at and mostly consider good, it made me think like, who do we have any of those characters left? And I realized we haven't talked much about Jon Snow, which I know that we have like mixed feelings about him in the show as he is now, but how did you find him in the book and like kind of reading about his first travel to the Wall?
My reading of Jon was informed by, or like very early on, by something that Sam pointed out in our little group chat about the book, which is that much of the sort of disdainful way that people read early Sansa is mirrored in Jon, in that both of them have kind of visions of the world, very fantastical visions of the world and the way it should be, that is guided by the sheltered lives that they led up to the point of this story beginning, and that, like, you know, we see this for both of them. To the degree to which they have an arc, it is mostly learning that the world kind of sucks, right, in ways like, and like
they believe in fairy tales, essentially.
Yeah, fairy tales. Thank you. That is the word that I was looking for. Yes, they both had very fairy tale-esque notions of the world, and so that was really, really interesting for me to kind of see. To like I was constantly kind of had my eyes peeled for those parallels and seeing that happen, which I'm not sure. I bring that up mostly because I'm not sure that I would have noticed it on my own. Like, I don't know, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that tremendously, and my meh feelings about Jon on the show are, this is much like Emilia Clarke. I also think Kit Harington, especially in the first season, is like both of them. Anytime we cut to their things, it was like, I can tell that these are clearly going to be very important characters. I wish you had casted two people who could act in these
would have been nice
roles. I get that they're both beautiful human beings. I agree, but like. You know, maybe don't hinge your entire series on meh actors. Anyway, that aside, I thoroughly enjoyed watching him have that little bit of discovery, in much the same way that with Arya, like, it was cool to go back and see again who she was at the beginning. I enjoyed that look into who Jon was.
I think that the difference between Sansa and Jon, for me, what made me feel a little bit more for Jon, is that Sansa, in her kind of fairy tale living, when she's slowly faced with the reality, but her heart is still like pulling towards King's Landing, to the point where she's like, no, Daddy, I do not want to go. And and when Jon is faced with like the harsh reality, you know, Benjen's missing, he's not come back, and they tell him that he's going to take the oath, he's going to take the black, and he immediately starts thinking like, can I go back home? Like, I haven't said the words yet. Like, can I still go back to Winterfell? Sure, they're just and the thing that like breaks him out of that is that he feels like he doesn't have a place there. They're only his half siblings. Kat would not welcome him back. So it's almost like out of necessity that he stays. But I think that's the difference, is that Sansa, like, she comes right up against the death of her father with never really having that pull into reality and back home, whereas Jon sees some things and he's always thinking about his brothers.
His life, he was less sheltered from even beforehand. He was not as sheltered as she was.
Yeah, so I think I had like some moments of like really, really feeling bad for Jon. Anytime he was like, well, they're only my half siblings, I was like, oh, Jon.
Oh, God.
I know.
Yeah, that was so heartbreaking.
I think the one last big Sansa move that Jon makes is actually when he finds out Ned is dead and he goes off on his midnight ride and tries to desert for like an hour and a half. Because that is so like, my brother needs me, and this is my honor, and you know, all that stuff. And like, and I love the conversation that Lord Commander Mormont has with him afterwards, which is like, bitch, you think you're special? Like, do you have some magic sword? I mean, you kind of do, but whatever. But like, do you,
anyway,
like, do you have some secret power that like the other 50,000 men riding with your brother like can't avenge your father? Only you can do that. Like, no, your head is in the clouds. Life is not a song. Your place is here. this is where you can make a difference. This is a war that actually fucking matters. Like, get your shit together, Snow. And that I think is when he, does have that realization of like, yeah, Rob isn't going to smile and hug me and say, oh, I missed you. He could behead me for a deserter because that's what real life has to make you do. And I think Sansa, like, while she's faced in full view with her father's death and the fact that Joffrey's a monster, she doesn't let go of all of the life is a song thing yet. I think even in the face of that, I think there's still more things she does because she still is young. And even as she tries to shake that and is learning how to shake that, like, I don't think that's something that happens all at once for her. And I think it's something that mostly does happen all at once for Jon.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Something else that's now going to happen all at once is us ending this episode of the podcast. We would love to hear what you thought of this episode, of this book, Game of Thrones, whatever, all of it. Talk to us at SnarkSquad.com, where there will be a post up for this episode, or on Twitter at Snark_squad. You can find me at Sweeney Says.
I am at My Name is Marines.
And I am at Democracy Diva.
Thank you to Sam for joining us again this week. Thank you to Stefan Chin for that fancy theme music you are listening to right now. And thank you to all of you for listening to us. We will be back in your ears again next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.